Hi guys,
Okay.
I'm with Brien Foerster. Brien Foerster. So what would you call yourself? You're an adventurer, right? Or you're an author. You've done, how many books have you done now? Over 37, right?
37.
37. Wow.
Hmm.
And you're a scientist. You're a
Hmm.
tour. You lead tours. So you're an adventurer.
Right.
Okay.
Basically.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess that 2020 must have put a kink in your touring for groups, I guess.
I
But is
think
that,
a stake. I think a stake in the heart is more of a way to describe it.
yeah, I imagine. Are you starting back up in 2021? Because I saw a couple of Peru trips scheduled on your website.
Yeah, we have one for June, one for August, and one for November, and then also a tour of Egypt in October. So hopefully all of this will have passed by then. That's what we're hoping and praying for.
Yeah, I hope so too. I'm sick of it. I'm ready to get out there. So
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. So you currently live in South America, am I correct?
I live in Peru.
You live in Peru. Okay. And am I correct in understanding that you actually own
Mhm.
the Paracas Skull Museum?
No, that's owned by my mentor who died a couple of years ago.
Okay, so you just kind of but you have like a lot of involvement in it, right?
I have done in the past, but of course, with this current situation, the museum has been closed for almost a year. So, we're hoping all of this stuff is going to start opening up as time goes on. That's what we're working on as much as possible.
Like I noticed you post a lot on YouTube. So are you basically just posting like more clips from some of the stuff that you have done in the past? Like, you know, like a lot, like for instance, yesterday I watched one that you did of Palenque
Hmm.
in Mexico. Or is that more recent? Or is that like these are all footage from past tours?
Oh yeah, it's all from hard drives because we can't go we can't go anywhere. In fact, we're going back into lockdown in 2 days. So leaving the house is going to be difficult for at least 2 weeks. So there's no way. I was in
You go.
Mexico in April and May, and did a bit of filming there, but all the archaeological sites were closed. So yeah, it's been very tough, but looking forward to the future.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so like let's talk about the Paracas Skulls real quick. So how many are in existence that we have that the public has access to?
Well, the public has access to a limited number in different museums, a few in the main Lima Museum, our little museum here, another museum in the city of Ica. They're also found in museum collections around the world because they're so bizarre looking that, the British Museum has them, the Smithsonian has them, uh, Philadelphia Museum has them, German museums have them. There are hundreds, if not thousands, in museum collections.
And are they all from Peru, this area? Or because I know that you've talked about how there's a genetic connection with the Black Sea, like,
Hmm.
and is there actually the same elongated skulls found around that area?
Yeah, they look exactly the same.
Okay, so I've actually seen some in the Lima Museum, and they look bigger than regular human heads. I mean, they are bigger than regular human heads. So, I mean, were these people like maybe not 18-foot giants, but were they bigger than regular people? I mean,
Well, they were taller than native Peruvians. Native Peruvians tend to be about 5'4", and the Paracas were about 6 feet. So they were, bigger than what the average native person would look like.
well, is there any skeletal remains that are ever found with the skulls that we have access to?
Oh, hundreds of, not that we have access to. There are hundreds of mummy bundles in the Lima Museum, but they don't put them on display. There are a few in smaller museums around me that I've had access to.
And what about this? I've heard you talk about the Star Child skull. What's the current story with that?
Well, it's a very odd looking little skull that looks very similar to the Star Child skull that Lloyd Pye was famous for. Um, it has eye sockets that angle up like that. Didn't have any teeth. We weren't able to find the lower jaw, which is problematic, but any medical doctor who's looked at it, and I've had many medical doctors look at it, they simply said, I don't know what that is, if they're being honest, which all of the ones that I've shown them this stuff to, they just go, I don't know what it is.
And then, okay, so you have had DNA sampling on some of these skulls, and there am I correct in thinking that you've concluded that some of it isn't exactly what, when I've heard that it's maybe not Homo sapien sapien, does that mean that it's completely foreign, or does that mean that it could have like Denisovan or Neanderthal or like the Hobbit people, or like some other kind of like relative of a Homo sapien sapien?
It doesn't look like it. I think they're Homo sapien Paracas. So there were a subspecies that originally existed around the Black Sea, must have migrated to the coast of Peru, and then were basically wiped out by the Nazca culture around 2,000 years ago.
Okay, so do you think with the Nazca culture, with the Nazca lines, do you think that the Paracas, do you think that they had anything to do with the Nazca lines, or is that completely two different cultures?
Yeah, the Paracas started that whole system. So they built a large geoglyph here, about 10 miles from where I'm at, called the Candelabro, which is about 500 feet tall on the side of a mountain. And then they moved south towards, and they did 1,500 geoglyphs on tops of little mesa mountains. And then they were, as I said, they were wiped out by the Nazca. Then the Nazca continued on with the practice of the lines, the geoglyphs.
Hmm. Yeah, I've been to Peru, and I remember seeing that. I thought it looked like a menorah almost, like but yeah, it's super cool. So you must live close to the little island with all the penguins and stuff on it. That's close to that
Oh
candle.
yeah, I can actually see it from, if I walk it on the deck, I can see right out there.
Oh, awesome. That's a very, very beautiful area. That's very cool. Do you think that this same culture had anything to do with like the building of Cusco or Sacsayhuaman or like Machu Picchu, like any of the that area as well, or
No,
no? Okay, so that's complete. So like
that was a completely different.
for me, Sacsayhuaman was one of the, I was like, what is this? It was like the stone masonry was just like the coolest thing I've ever seen anywhere in the history of the world.
Mm-hmm.
I just cannot fathom how it was made, because it does kind of look melted in a lot of ways, or not melted, but like put together like Play-Doh would be put together. It's like so perfect, but in like they had shapes of a serpent within like a big stone wall and stuff. So who do you think built that?
Mm-hmm.
And when do you think
Well,
that
nobody
was
really knows. Well, I think the megalithic stuff is at least 13,000 years old. So it was all inherited by the Inca. The Inca moved into an abandoned megalithic city, and that they called it Cusco because they called it the navel of the world. So nobody knows who did the original construction. The archaeologists keep insisting that the Inca did it, which is technically impossible because you've been there and you've seen it. And I've had a number of stonemasons, engineers come with me, and they all say, I have no idea how anybody would do that. So that's the basic story. It's unknown. The name Peru comes from an ancient race of people called the Pirwas. So that's where Peru gets its name from. So it's possible they were the ancient builders, or you can even get more exotic thinking, beyond that if you want, as in people not of this earth. We simply don't know.
Yeah, the global cataclysm. You think a lot of this was pre-existing? What about like Lake
Yeah, I
Titicaca
think it's
and
all
like,
pre-cataclysmic.
Okay, what about like Pumapuku or, you know, Tiwanaku?
Same,
Same.
same,
Yeah, and
same. Yeah.
I recently was watching a video about how those H blocks like in Pumapunku are like have magnetic anomalies, and that how they can do like they can make things have like monopoles and stuff. So I don't know, do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I'm the one who discovered that.
Okay, cool. So can you talk about that? Like that's
Yeah.
amazing.
Well, it is. There are two types of stone, Pumapuku and Tiwanaku. They're actually the same place. They just archaeologists label differently. I don't know why, but they are the same place. Whoever built the one built the other. And so there are two types of stone. There's red sandstone, which comes from 8 miles away. And then there's this gray andesite that comes from 55 miles away. And the quarries are known by geologists. So the red sandstone is neutral to a compass or to a magnetometer. It shows absolutely no effect if you put a magnetometer or compass up to it.
Hmm.
But the gray andesite reacts sometimes quite violently to either of those measuring instruments. We haven't been able to find a particular pattern of magnetism yet, but for example, with the H blocks, when you take the compass and put it into the central slot, the needle will spin by 270 degrees. And then when you pull it back out, it goes back to normal again. So no one's been able to solve what the relationship or why those stones are magnetized. It clearly is the case.
Wow. Okay. And then I've also heard you kind of talk about how they're not uniform, that like each H block is not necessarily exactly uniform to the next one. Is that correct?
That's correct. Each one is unique.
It kind of reminds me of have you I went to Costa Rica and they have those big spheres, like the big stone spheres that are just randomly placed throughout the country. And like I went to this one park and there was probably like
Mm-hmm.
13 of them or something, and they're all different kind of stone. Like one was made out of, you could actually see little fossils in it. It was like a, you know, like a limestone with all kinds of little stuff. And then there were some that were like actual granite. And they're not too far from each other. They're all different shapes. Like some are a lot larger than the other ones, but they're also made out of different stones, but they're next to each other and they're perfect spheres. So it's very bizarre. I wonder if there's any
Mm-hmm.
kind of construction relation
It is.
or
Some of the theories are that archaeologists, with the stone spheres, archaeologists, they always have to come up with a theory about everything or a story about everything, but they don't know what those stone spheres were made, who made them, why they were made, how they were made. It's the same thing with the megalithic structures. They have to cover their tracks no matter what, but they often will come up with some kind of nonsensical story that makes no logical sense whatsoever to fit what they're looking at within their paradigm. And luckily, that's now falling apart.
yeah, it's weird to me that they can't just say, I don't know, we don't know. You know, that's like not
Yeah.
hard. So what about have you done any what's your take on the Easter Island stones?
Yeah. Again, two different cultures. The ones that have the European looking noses, that are the big ones, they look like, they were clearly made long before the smaller ones. So you have some that are 30 feet tall, and then a lot of them that are about 6 feet tall. So the little ones were made by the Polynesians who showed up on Easter Island around 1,000 years ago. And they discovered the giant ones when they arrived. It's obvious when you go there. You just look at the difference. And so Dr. Robert Schock, who's a geologist, went there with me, and he said, I have no problem in dating these big ones at 12,000 plus years old based on erosion patterns. So there's a geologist
And
backing up the
are the
idea.
big ones the ones that are like actually have the full bodies that were buried?
Yeah, all of them do. There are 950 of them.
I recently saw a video about they were moving one of the bodies, like they like had a bunch of pulleys of ropes, and they were able to make it move itself, or not move itself, but with pulleys, they were able to make it walk basically. Which when I was in college, what was told to me was they basically destroyed their island by cutting down all the trees and using the logs to roll the stones on. And that's why when they were discovered in the whatever, like 1500s, they were all cannibals, and like very few of them were existence anymore because they destroyed their own environment. Like, that's the story I was told about Easter Island in college.
Yeah, that's completely wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't like that at all. Nobody would be stupid enough to cut down all the trees on your island. What happened was when the Polynesians arrived, they brought rats with them accidentally, because rats were hiding on their canoes. So when the rats got out, they went right after the trees because they're quite soft palm trees, and they wound up just killing almost all the palm trees off that way. And then with the arrival of the first Europeans, which was Roggeveen in 1720 something, he said that he met with a very happy looking people, quite a big population. Some were tall, some were short, some were dark skinned, some were light skinned, some had black hair, some had red hair, and some had blonde hair. So in contact with the Europeans that caused their demise. And then 50 years later, when Captain Cook showed up, that's when living in caves and they were afraid to come out, and they were starving and all that kind of thing. So it's a completely different story.
Wow. Yeah. That's cool. Okay, so I went to Egypt for the first time in October, and I've since watched a bunch of your videos when I came back. And so what like one of the things that for me was super fascinating that I heard you say was I heard you talk on another podcast about how the Seraphim, and about how you had somebody tell you a story about how they at some point found, or maybe it wasn't at the Seraphim, but there was some kind of there was a story about these electrified bodies that were found, and like they were maybe being used to be regenerized, or like as a teleportation or something. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it turns out that story was a lie.
Oh.
My informant had lied to me. I learned that about a month ago, that because he was going to be with us on all of our coming up tours, and the tour coordinator in Egypt told me he lies to everybody because he wants them to be fascinated with stories. So I just said, well, that's the end of that relationship. Bye.
Right. Well, the Osiren to me looked very similar to like Olibitomble, or how do you say that? I mean, it's like I thought that Osiren, like when you go down, and I thought it looked completely out of place for everywhere else in Egypt. I thought it was like one of the coolest places ever. So what's your take on that?
Well, again, it's pre-cataclysmic. The same story in Egypt. You have the dynastic work that was done by the pharaohs, and then you have the pre-dynastic work that they discovered when they entered Egypt about 5,000 years ago. So the difference between dynastic people were able to shape works in limestone and sandstone, and the pre-dynastic builders were working with granite, diorite, and basalt, very hard stone. Mm-hmm. So again, it's the same story in different parts of the world. You have the standard story, which conveniently fits in with the paradigm, and then you have the inconvenient story where clearly there was advanced civilizations that pre-exist history as we know it.
I mean, what do you think about like the hinges, like Sainsbury or Stonehenge, or some of the cairns in France? Do you think that's more modern, like they say it's like 3,000 years old, or do you think that's more megalithic, like pre-cataclysm?
No, I think it's megalithic, but it's not that well done. So constructing Stonehenge would have been difficult because you're moving big stone blocks from a quarry maybe 100 miles away. So that would be very difficult, but we don't see the precision surfaces that we see in places like Peru and Egypt and Bolivia. So yeah, I think the Celts or their ancestors were responsible for Stonehenge or Karnak in France, and all of those kind of work, the dolmens and things like that. Uh,
Well, what
so
about
yeah,
Malta? Like what's your like Malta or Sardinia?
I'm hoping to go to Malta in September, and Malta looks like has ancient megalithic stuff. So like the Hypogeum. So I'm really fascinated to go there. Um, yeah, it's one of the last stuff that's really on my so-called bucket list to go. Aside from going back to places like Egypt at least once a year, but Malta looks very curious.
Yeah, I'm actually going September 30th. I was supposed to go last year and that got canceled. I'm going with Maria Wheatley. Um
Oh,
and
good.
yeah, and so like our it got rescheduled for basically October 1st through the 14th or something of 2021. Like fingers crossed, like I really hope. Um
I
uh
know.
so like I've also never seen it, but I'm kind of like super curious about it. So like when you went to okay, there's another story that I heard you talk about with I don't know if it was like like it was a little creature in this jar that you looked at and somebody found it in Mexico and they had put it in formaldehyde.
Yeah, that's fake. That's fake.
That was fake too. Man, that sucks.
Yeah, because well, it's too bad. But what happened was that the main researcher, Eli Marzulli, is who I know. He went down there, and they had to make multiple trips down to see it. But eventually, they were allowed to take it out of the jar to examine it, and then it automatically started to fall apart. And they noticed sections of matchsticks were used to hook the different body parts together. So
Ah,
that story just blew apart automatically.
yeah.
Very clever job, but unfortunately fake.
I also heard you say like what's more impressive than
Mhm.
Göbekli Tepe was the Titus tunnel.
Yeah.
What's your current feeling or hypothesis about like how advanced are we talking about? Like was this Atlantis and Mu that was just destroyed and then we're just seeing the remnants of it, or what? Like what do you think it was? Do you think they were all interconnected somehow?
I don't. I think it was either what we call Atlantis or it was aliens. The more I look at this stuff, the more I see how incredibly difficult it would have been. Some of this stuff is beyond our capability, and that's what stonemasons and engineers say too. They just go, we can't do this kind of stuff. Like the boxes in the Serapeum are another example, weighing 100 tons, each one made out of the lid and the box being made out of one piece of stone. We don't have the technology to be able to do out of one piece of stone. So I
And perfect
honestly, I'm
seams.
steering more and more towards, yeah, seamlessly fitting together.
Hmm.
So I'm starting to lean more and more towards the extraterrestrial visitation idea than a human civilization.
So if you go down that road, are you kind of going more with maybe the Zachariah Sitchin stuff where it's like maybe we are Martians or something, and do you then think that perhaps if these advanced beings came here and built all this, and then what do you think we are just like uh somehow related to them, or how do you think the human story fits in with that?
Well, I think they simply came, they did these constructions for their own reasons, and then they left. And that's why when people say, where are the tools? They took the tools with them. They had something they wanted to do here. They accomplished what they were doing. I think they were all hit by a massive series of cataclysms. And then either they were wiped out or they were able to leave before they were wiped out. And we were able to inherit these incredible accomplishments and then repurpose them. So the dynastic Egyptians turned everything into a temple, or something of that of spirituals, and turned them also into places of worship and reverence. But who the original builders were, I don't know. I don't think whoever built the stuff in Egypt was the same who did the construction in Peru and Bolivia. I think you're looking at probably 3 or 4 different civilizations being involved, maybe contemporary with one another, but maybe not.
Yeah. I mean, and there are a lot of, like, I haven't been there, but the place in Sri Lanka, what's it called? It's like Suragi or Suringa. I can't say it, but it's basically it's on a cliff, and it's just like some ruins that are, you could have only gotten to them if you were able to fly. And same sort of thing with, what are the Nazca lines? Like, if you can only see, like, what are the, I mean, I've seen the candelabra, but I haven't actually been in a plane looking over the Nazca lines. But from my understanding, on the ground, they don't look like anything.
Actually, as you're driving by, you can see them, the lines, you see them come and go like that, some of them.
Mm-hmm.
But they're, Nazca covers an area of about more than 100 miles, and more than 1,600 of these geoglyphs. Most are quite small, some are huge. The biggest ones were made by the Nazca people, but the majority were made by the Paracas people before them.
How can you tell, like, which is which?
By the style, very different style.
And so why doesn't it rain there? Like, I guess that's presumably the reason why these lines can even still exist in the way they do, right? It's because it just hasn't rained, like, hardly anything in like 1,000 years or something.
Well, it rains about half an inch a year. So, like where I am, also in Paracas, it rains half an inch a year. That's it. So you don't get rainfall. It's part of what's called the Atacama Desert that extends down into Chile. And there are places in Chile where it hasn't rained for something like 300 years. So it's mainly the lack of rainfall, the lack of high winds that has allowed these things to survive for as long as they have.
What's your next book going to be about? Like, what's the next mystery that you're thinking about?
Maybe my last book will be going to Israel.
Like, what in particular about Israel? Like the Dome of the Rock, or the, like,
what is the Dome of the Rock built on is the big question, because again, there are megalithic aspects to the construction of what is underneath Temple Mount.
mm-hmm.
And even Temple Mount itself, the Wailing Wall, you look at the size of the blocks, and there's also a tunnel that goes under the Wailing Wall area. That some stones weigh 560 tons. And again, the archaeologists are saying, well, obviously Solomon was a great builder because he was able to maneuver these things up 30 feet, from the ground and stick into a wall. It's just ridiculous. So I want to go there and have a look at what mysteries hide in Israel, and see how far back in time that goes. I think, again, I'll be looking at some megalithic stuff that standard academics cannot explain.
I just have a hard time understanding, like, why they aren't curious about the mystery of all this stuff. Like, why they just ignore it rather than look at it. I guess, I mean, we aren't, I don't know what we can really do about that, but it is interesting that that's, I wonder, like, where that comes from. The I don't know if you call it the ability, like the desire to just overlook these major things in your face, like Baalbek, like the Lebanon, or or the Temple of Jupiter, like the big giant, those are like the biggest blocks ever. Like, they're just, no one really talks about it. It's just like, yeah, they built a temple on top of it,
Yeah.
But it's like,
Yeah.
okay, but we have to,
well, the important thing is to simply to make videos and podcasts and stuff, and teach the world that is the story. And that's the best way to move forward with it, because it's just becoming more and more ridiculous, them trying to protect their paradigm when obviously they know it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So that's, that's the way forward, is not to debate or anything, just present the evidence and let people see what is in front of their faces, what their eyes are looking at. Like, oh, I don't understand. It's like, good, neither do I.
So anytime you've had your tours where you've had people that you've taken around, have you ever had like really big naysayers that are like, for instance, that sexy woman going like, yeah, anybody could have done this? Like, do you actually have naysayers when you show them the evidence?
Never.
Yeah.
Not one person in thousands have said, oh, I get how I could do, I get how somebody could do that. They all just look at the stuff, just completely dumbfounded and go, what? We don't have this back in Missouri. It's like, that's correct. you know,
Yeah,
it's, yeah, people are just, yeah, everyone's, yeah, the jaws just drop and go, what?
for me, actually, like I had just barely started studying ancient archaeology stuff whenever I went to Peru, and I actually went with a yoga tour guide. It wasn't, or a yoga group. It wasn't specifically for, you know, ruins and stuff. And I like couldn't sleep at night. Like I would, when I, like for me, I mean, I did Machu Picchu, and we did a lot of these things, but when I went to Sexy Woman, like all I was just like, I couldn't sleep for like 3 nights because I was just like, what is this? Like, this is not okay. Like, why aren't we all talking about this? This is crazy. Like when I saw it in person, and I had never even heard the name before I went there. I had never, that had never even been something that like was in my radar. And I was like, why isn't this something that every kindergartner knows about? It's just I do find that when people actually go and see some of these things for themselves in person, their paradigms will really, really, really be shifted.
Oh yeah.
How many tours do you try to do in Peru a year?
We've reduced it down to about three main ones, and then some private ones. But yeah, we'll just have to see what the future holds.
Down there, are you able to study stuff locally?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. The elongated skull graveyard is about a 20-minute drive from my house, so I've got all that in this area.
Very, very cool. Well, Brien, it was really fun. I had a really good time talking to
Mhm.
you. Thank you so much for doing this. And I love your YouTube channel. So please keep posting stuff. I think it's you have such amazing insights, and you really are a treasure to us all. So thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. Please share my YouTube channel with people. It'd be good to have more and more people look at the evidence.